an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering the Vorkosigan saga. Book 4 to me, Book 6 to the Kindle app, The Vor Game. Chapters 1, 2, and 3. In these chapters, Miles gets an assignment that he didn't expect, that I also didn't expect. But frankly, I get it. And I think maybe I can relate. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Jeff for commissioning this episode and allowing me to reschedule when there was a kind of shutdown on Crowdcast on me yesterday. Jeff is in the chat. Yay! I wasn't sure if you'd be able to come, Jeff. Delighted to see you. So this is, you guys don't know, I had to reschedule. Crowdcast told me I was out of hours. Long story. They were able to fix that. I'm here. But you guys don't even know how upset I was that I didn't get to record yesterday, because this was the recording I was really looking forward to. I enjoyed these first 3 chapters so much. And I was like, oh, well, you know, I have the one I'm most excited for at the end of the day, so I'll still have my energy up by then because I'll be looking forward to it. And then that whole thing happened. And I was so bummed because I was very much looking forward to signing off for the evening and then listening to the next chapters, and I didn't get to do that. So I get to do it today, and I'm going to try and just enjoy that. But these chapters were very, very compelling. I enjoy Miles so much as a character. I am very invested in where he's going in life and how things are going to turn out for him. The writer has made things feel like they have enough stakes that I'm never quite sure how. I don't really worry that Miles is going to die or anything, of course, but I know that terrible things can still happen to you in this universe. Like, this writer has had awful things happen before that people have then recovered from. So all of that combined with just how beautifully she writes, I am really, really into this and extremely curious what's coming, because the forecast, so to speak, is weird. And I guess we'll have to see what happens. Jeff says, I love this one for many reasons, but I especially love how many times he almost dies. Noted. So the opening of the book, you guys, I'll get to it in a second. We start off with ship duty, chortled the ensign 4 ahead of Miles in line. Glee lit his face as his eyes sped down his orders. So this dude is getting the kind of assignment that they're all hoping for. And just literally skips away, practically, because he is just delighted with his assignment. So this guy, Plaus, comes up, and they all get given an envelope that has their assignment inside. So he opens it, and he gets language school as a student for galactic languages. Intelligence will be wanting you after you're bound off planet for sure, said Miles. And Plaus says, well, maybe. Or they could just make me, stick me in a box to program computers. But he does seem excited. And I love that Miles is like, as much as that would be a cush job, you'd have to work under Ilian, and that man is difficult because he just remembers everything and is probably quite a stickler, you know? So, Lubacek, hey, what's up? IMPSEC, the advanced course in security and counter-assassination. Palace Guard School, which is a huge honor. And let's see. Oh, yeah, here it is. Will I really meet the Emperor? You'll probably get to watch him eat breakfast every day, said Ivan. Poor sod. Did he mean Lubitschek or Gregor? Gregor, definitely. It hadn't even occurred to me that he meant Gregor, and when it was confirmed that's definitely what he meant, I giggled out loud. So then, Ivan Vorpatrol. And he gets Imperial HQ in Vorbar Sultana. And he tries to be positive here and is feeling like clearly a little disappointed because he wanted ship duty the way that everybody else wants it. But it's kind of nice because he gets to have like an apartment in town and live like a civilian mostly, which that does allow a certain amount of freedom, but it just isn't like the excitement, you know? So Miles hesitated for self-discipline, for fear, for a last lingering moment of high hope. He thumbed the lock pad and unzipped the envelope with deliberate precision. A single plastic flimsy, a handful of travel passes. His deliberation lasted only for the brief moment it took him to absorb the short paragraph before his eyes. He stood frozen. Get it? In disbelief, began reading again from the top. And he says, did we ever have meteorology courses, guys? And 5 space math, xenobotany, geology, terrain. There was aviation weather. What have they done to you? I'm assigned as Chief Meteorology Officer. Laskowski Base. Where the hell is Laskowski Base? I've never even heard of it. The sergeant at the desk looked up with a sudden evil grin. I have, sir, he offered. It's on a place called Kirill Island up near the Arctic Circle. Winter training base for infantry. The grubs call it Camp Permafrost. And Miles hears this and is just like, there's no possible way they're putting me in for infantry. Look at me. How could that... There's no way, unless they're trying to fuck with me, and I just don't see it. And the whole, like, vibe of this is very much everybody who knows his assignment has been looking forward to seeing how he reacts to when he opens it and sees what it is. And he goes to see Major Cecil as the sergeant who gave him his assignment sort of smirks behind him. So we go to Cecil, and when Miles comes in, he turns to his assistant and says, you owe me $10. He was here within 10 minutes, just like I said. So the fact that everybody is so aware of Miles, that they have him pegged like this, is just, it's very funny. I don't even think it's necessarily insulting. It's just, as he says later, you were the most watched of anybody that's come through here other than Gregor, you know? And he says, it's a perfectly normal assignment. Were you expecting an extraordinary one? My job is to match personnel requests with available candidates. Every request must be filled by someone. Any tech school grad could have filled this one. It doesn't require an academy cadet. That's right. Why then? Because I have noticed, Vorkosigan, watching you, and you know very well you were the most closely watched cadet ever to pass through these halls, barring Emperor Gregor himself, that despite your demonstrated brilliance in some areas, you have also demonstrated some chronic weaknesses. And I'm not referring to your physical problems, which everybody but me thought were going to take you out before your first year was up. You've been surprisingly sensible about those. But your most insidious, chronic problem is in the area of, how shall I put this precisely? Subordination. You argue too much. No, I don't, Miles began indignantly, then shut his mouth. Indignantly, sorry. Cecil flashed a grin. Quite. Plus, your rather irritating habit of treating your superior officers as your equals, cattle, to be driven to your will. You're a manipulator par excellence, Vorkosigan. I've been studying you for 3 years now, and your group dynamics are fascinating. Whether you were in charge or not, somehow it was always your idea that ended up getting carried out. Have I been that disrespectful, sir? On the contrary, given your background, the marvel is that you conceal that, little arrogant streak so well. But Vorkosigan, the Imperial Academy is not the whole of the Imperial service. You've made your comrades here appreciate you, because here brains are held at a premium. You were picked first for any strategic team, for the same reason you were picked last for any purely physical contest. These young hotshots wanted to win all the time, whatever it took. Sometimes you must learn how to command ordinary men and be commanded by them. This isn't a punishment, and it isn't my idea of a joke. Upon my choices may depend not only our fledgling officers' lives, but also those of the innocents I inflict them on. If I seriously miscalculate, overmatch, or mismatch a man with a job, I not only risk him, but also those around him. Now, in 6 months, plus unscheduled overruns, the Imperial Orbital Shipyard is going to finish commissioning the Prince Surge, the newest, fastest, deadliest thing His Imperial Majesty has ever put into space, and with the longest range. It will go out and stay out for longer periods than anything we've ever had before. It follows that everyone on board will be in each other's hair for longer unbroken periods than ever before. High Command is actually paying some attention to the psych profiles on this one for a change. If you can keep your nose clean for just 6 months on an isolated downside post, bluntly, if you can prove you can handle Camp Permafrost, I'll allow as how you can handle anything the service might throw at you, and I'll support your request for a transfer to the Prince. But if you screw up, there will be nothing I or anybody else can do for you. Sink or swim, Ensign. Just how much of a pit is this place? I wouldn't want to prejudice you. So this is the summary. You know, he's got this plum gig that he could eventually get if he is able to just keep his attitude under control. And you guys, there's this moment here. He says, this made me laugh. Nobody's going to try and drop a full field pack on you and smash you flat. I doubt there's an officer in the service who would choose to explain your dead body to the Admiral. Your saving grace, mutant. Cecil was without prejudice, merely testing. Always testing. Miles ducked his head. As I may be for the mutants who come after me. You figured that out, have you? Years ago, sir. Good luck, then. What's your first stop? The Academy Archives, for a downloading of the Service Meteorology Manual and supplementary material. Very good. By the way, your predecessor in the post will be staying on a few weeks to complete your orientation. We're not trying to make it impossible. I'm glad to know that, sir. So, y'all, this... Here's the thing, and I know we all have our particular difficulties where there is something that we simultaneously are very good at and also terrible at in another way. So it makes things kind of complicated. And for me, I have often talked about how much I love rules and impressing authority figures and just basically like managing to shine beyond what's expected of me, but within a framework of like clear definitions that give us all strict boundaries to follow. And I get really frustrated when other people don't follow those same boundaries. It can be kind of infuriating to me. I'm like, you know how we're supposed to be doing this. Why are you acting like this? So in that way, I will often do what I am told because that is what I am told to do. And I know that that has been told to me, likely for a pretty good reason. But this is the flip side. I am somebody who really needs to know why a lot. There are times where I just am like, I will accept that I'm not supposed to do the thing and I don't need to know why. But those are really kind of one-offs. If it's something that's a job that I'm expected to do every day a certain way, it really bothers me if it doesn't seem like what they're asking of me makes sense. And when I was growing up, I would often ask, or it seemed to others, challenge why we were doing something a certain way. And it was never my intent to be disdainful or dismissive or contemptuous. It was genuinely asking why. And this is something that I really have started to understand recently in my life, that with the differences in the way people communicate, the way that I communicate, I want to know why we do something this way because I don't understand. And I say, so why? And I say it, and what the person on the receiving end hears is a passive-aggressive why. Like I'm insinuating they're wrong. That is not at all what I mean to do. If I am asking why that doesn't make sense, it's a stupid move, I don't just say, well, why? I say, hold on, that doesn't make sense, because I will actually say those words. But a lot of people add a certain amount of passive aggressiveness to their interpretation that I almost never actually intend. I am just not the type to communicate that way. And so it can be very hard because I am genuine in my suggestions or my questions or outlining a certain scenario, and it will be interpreted by people as me being really rude or insulting somehow, or so growing up, I was told a lot that I argued too much. And look, I do like to argue. I'm not trying to even argue that. I do. But sometimes it was me genuinely wanting to know why. And my father was very big on obedience. He wanted my mother to obey him. He wanted me to obey him. He was the head of the family. He was the man, and we should do what we're told, and we shouldn't ask questions. And I didn't get that. As a kid, I was just like, all I'm asking is for further information so that I understand your thinking on this. And that way, my often thinking was, if things happen so that I can't complete this in the way you suggest, if I know why you suggested I do this way, I can come up with an alternative that still accomplishes what you intend, even if the method winds up being different. For me, the information makes me more adaptable, and sometimes, perhaps, I can come up with a better idea, but that's not necessarily it. But my father would hear me, and he would think I was simply questioning him as a question of his authority, and he would really take that personally and the wrong way. And it was so difficult for me because I would just be trying to explain myself. He would say it was arguing or that it was excuses. I was just trying to ask questions, and he would say that I was, just being difficult. So all this to say that to a degree, I feel like I get where some things might be coming from with Miles. Potentially, because we're inside his head and we know how quickly he thinks. However, here's the other thing. I'm saying how much I like authority, but I just want to know why. What happens is that a lot of, and this is why I've wound up working for myself, a lot of the places that I have worked, I have been managed by a person who isn't as competent as I am. And it is deeply frustrating. It's really, really difficult to go in every day and be told what to do by somebody that I can tell does not have the critical thinking skills or the attention to detail that I have. And so I will develop a sort of attitude because I come in feeling like I've got a new job and I'm going to really show them how great I am at this and stand out and all of this stuff, and I intend this, and then I do it. And sometimes it results in me realizing that the person managing me is actually not great. And now I have to come in and submit to their authority every day. And I hate it. I find it so frustrating. And I can also just become like downright resentful. So Miles is so intelligent. I mean, just beyond his instructors, clearly, a lot of the time, because we ended the last book with them trying to trip him up. And he still manages to like succeed despite them focusing on him and specifically attempting to thwart him. So we know Miles is just far above and beyond the average person in terms of his speed, wit, his seeing the big picture and thinking a few steps ahead. He is going to be smarter than most people that he meets. And combine that with the fact that he is actually essentially a royal and so has the protection of his father. I could see how, combined later on, he mentions like having been at dinners or at parties with people who were superior officers and getting to see them in a setting where they were being very frank and human. And that causes a sort of like familiarity, which can breed contempt. And that is an experience that is unique to him because of his position that his friends don't have. So all of that together, I definitely see how it would turn you into somebody who's got that arrogance and you have just enough intelligence to know to like dial that back, or that maybe you're being kind of unwise, but if nobody's calling you on it or you turn out to always be right, you just decide that you're going to keep doing it, you know, and the people around you, as his instructor says here, they want to win, so they're going to let you be a bit of a shit, even if they find it annoying, because you produce the results they want. But once we're in like a regular situation of like day-to-day stuff, that's not going to fly as well. And people are going to get much more irritated and be less patient with you. So I relate a lot to probably where some of this is coming from for him. Not all of it, you know, but it's a really tricky thing to simultaneously be somebody who respects authority and also somebody who rails against it when I realize that somebody is not, in my opinion, up to par, you know. Sorry, Jeff is in the chat. He says, I'm sort of terrible at not being combative with bad managers. One thing that helps us doing like Jon Snow's friend says to consider that I have a brain that sees the big picture and I'm very well trained in critical thinking. Instead of training to be a knight, I was trained to be a leader, but for some reason I've chosen to be a union worker, so I have to endure bad managers on the daily. And it's, you know, this is just a fact of life. Like, most people aren't super competent, and the ones that are, you can be worn down so that you stop caring even. And even the people who are of average competence, day in and day out doing the same job, you start to get a little lax and lazy, and as long as things get done, you're not too worried about it. It's just really, this is something that I should have worked on. I wish that there had been a person like this to tell me, I get what's happening with you, but you can't keep behaving like this because it's going to bite you in the ass. Because it does. It really does. Luckily, I wound up having a skill and managed to be able to fall back on a job where I work for myself. And now I just have my own authority to deal with, which is quite terrible enough. But, you know, it can be something that if you can keep it under control, you can think to yourself what you want as long as you don't show it. But there comes a point where I can't help but show it because I don't like to expend my energy hiding my feelings most of the time. So it'll be very obvious to whoever's managing me that I don't think they are shit and find them kind of a joke. And, what follows is unsurprising. So anyway, the next section, he gets to the base, to Kirill Island. And as soon as he gets there is this group of dudes who do not think that he can hear them and talk very openly about how he's a mutant, calling him it, and marveling that he's even in a uniform. And there is this really interesting line here. The old genetic fears were so subtly ingrained, so pervasive even now, you could get beaten to death by people who didn't even know quite why they hated you, but simply were carried away in the excitement of a group feedback loop. Wow. That's exactly it. The feedback loop. I know I've heard the term mob mentality, but I feel like feedback loop is kind of a better way of saying that, because mob mentality implies a sort of aggressiveness in a way that it doesn't always start out like that. Whereas a feedback loop has a sense of escalation to it. It starts with something that's kind of minor and then it ramps up. Whereas mob mentality, all I can think of is all of the villagers in Beauty and the Beast with their pitchforks and torches heading, and it doesn't always start off like that. And that they didn't even know quite why they hated you. Like, there have got to be so many people out there that have run into this, and for, all kinds of different reasons, sexuality or gender presentation or race or, disability, like with Miles. And there's a horrible story. A destitute, crippled man found castrated with a broken wine bottle by a gang of drunks. It was considered progress that it was a scandal and not simply taken for granted. A recent infanticide in the Vorkosigan's own district had cut even closer to the bone. So yeah, I appreciate this reminder of how bad this still is. It's also kind of surprising to me, and I'm not sure if this is something that's explicable or if we're just going to sort of like not pay attention to it, but Miles having the disability that he does and being as high profile as he is with, being Vorkosigan's son, the fact that it hasn't spread to everybody that he has this disability, that, people don't see him and know who he is based solely on this, does surprise me a little bit. I would think that it would be something to be remarked on by most people that he ran into. And so the fact that he isn't recognized right away, maybe there's just not, I don't know. I was going to say it doesn't even need to be photos though. Like, I'm trying to think about the way the culture works here. And I feel like even gossip should be adequate to get this sort of circling around. So he goes up to them and he has to like really show off that he has the officer, pins or whatever it is. And they at first hesitate to even speak to him as if they don't want to believe that he's really an officer. And finally, when they like call him officer or salute, it's just barely borderline, disrespectful, almost in the way that Miles just was in the previous section of this chapter. So he goes over to the meteorology like area that he's supposed to meet his mentor, I guess, the person that he's going to wind up replacing. And when he gets there, this man is in a room that is like described as blood temperature. It's got the lights dimmed. There is a man, unshaven, in tighty whities, drunk on the floor. And that dude sees him says, "Salute, boy, love ya," and then falls over and passes out. So, not a super auspicious start. Miles took a contemplative half hour and thoroughly examined his new domain. There was no doubt he was going to require instruction in the office's operations. Besides the satellite real-time images, automated data seemed to be coming in from a dozen microclimate survey rigs spotted around the island. If procedural manuals had ever existed, they weren't around now, not even on the computers. After an honorable hesitation, bemusedly studying the snoring, twitching figure on the floor, Miles also took the opportunity to go through On's desk and comm console files. And he finds out that this guy has been here for 20 years and is almost retiring and is clearly just like kind of at his limit. And Miles begins to feel a little bit of sympathy for the way that he is comporting himself. He winds up exploring, trying to find another person who is, again, competent or in charge. He runs into a man who is very put together and clearly had just been on a run. So this is somebody who's got some discipline, and it probably should have clued Miles in that the fact that this guy is like as together as he is, that this was not the one that he should talk like this to, but he can't. He's so irritated, I think, by the culmination of how this has gone so far. He can't really keep it inside. He sees Miles and frowns very heavily at him. Miles interprets this as more antagonism because of how he looks, which is very probable. That's exactly what it is. Miles stood with his legs slightly apart, threw back his head, and stared up with equal force. The man seemed totally oblivious to Miles' collar tabs. Exasperated, Miles snapped, "Are all the keepers on vacation, or is anybody actually running this bloody zoo?" The man's eyes sparked, as if their iron had struck flint. They ignited a little warning light in Miles' brain, one mouthy moment too late. "Hi there, sir!" cried the hysterical commenter in the back of Miles' mind with a skip, bow, and flourish. "I'm your newest exhibit." With a cold flare of his carved nostril, the base commander glared down at Miles and growled, "I run it, ensign." So, not an auspicious start. Yet again. Miles goes into the office to see On again the next morning, and the man is sober. He is dressed. He's like still kind of fucked up looking, clearly hungover, and not somebody who really cares about his appearance, but definitely better than yesterday. So he comes in, and he doesn't remember that Miles was here yesterday. The whole thing, like, Miles has to walk him through how it went, and even makes up some things just to, like, skip past a few of the formalities. "You promised you'd give me a complete technical orientation to the office this morning." "Ah, good. Well, He confined his reaction to Miles' physical appearance to one covert glance, and perhaps deciding they must have got the social duties of introductions out of the way yesterday, plunged at once into a description of the equipment lining the wall in order from left to right. Literally an introduction. All the computers had women's names. On seemed coherent enough as he detailed his job, and he occasionally sort of trails off into silence, but, you know, mostly Miles can bring him back and get him talking about things. And he is kind of seeming to get more worn out as this conversation continues and begins to have to lean on stuff. It seems that he has a headache. Kirill Island was an egg-shaped lump about 70 kilometers wide and 160 kilometers long, and over 500 kilometers from the next land of any description. Lumpy and brown described most of it, both base and island. The majority of the nearby buildings, including Miles' officer barracks, were dug in, topped with native turf. Nobody had bothered with agricultural terraforming here. The island retained its original Barrieran ecology, scarred by use and abuse. So, yeah, it is pretty grim looking here. Ocean views, but the ocean is gray, and there's lots of fog, and it's extremely damp and chill. And you guys know that combo. Humidity makes any temperature feel more extreme because there's just more contact on your skin. So whether it's cold or heat, whenever it's more humid, it's going to feel fucking worse. So he tells this guy that he's a Vorkosigan, and he asks, what's your dad really like? And he just boils it down to, he's a hard act to follow. Is that what you're doing, following the old man's footsteps here? I'm Vor. I serve. Or at any rate, I try to. Wherever I'm put, that was the deal. Well, no Wawa warnings today. So, it turns out that Wawas are these sort of random freak winds that pop up and are really, really powerful. And they can, like, toss equipment around. They can pick people up and fling them. And there are ropes from building to building that you hold onto in case a Wawa comes up while you are walking. And that way you don't get blown off. If you lose your grip, don't fling out your arms to try and stop yourself. I've seen more guys break their wrists that way. Go into a ball and roll. I've seen it go from dead calm to 160 kilometers with a temperature drop from 10 degrees above freezing to 20 below in 7 minutes. It can last from 10 minutes to 2 days. And the way that he's talking about this initially and just calling them Wawas, at first Miles is like, is he just fucking with me? And then it becomes clear that this is a serious thing, and it's just sort of the term that they use for it here, like a colloquialism. And you guys, I'm sure a lot of Americans also could not stop thinking about the chain of convenience stores and, you know, kind of combo restaurants, Wawas, that are up in the Northeast. I don't have them down here in Texas, and I miss them. I really do. So finally there comes the point where Miles is looking at the numbers, and he's saying, like, you just told me a bunch of info about today. Where'd you get that from? And he's like, well, they're correct. And Miles says, like, I believe you, but, you know, I am going to need to do this, so you have to explain it to me. And finally, he says, I hadn't thought about it, but it's the way the day smells, I guess. Miles wrinkled his nose and sniffed experimentally. So, finally, we have the standardized computerized projections, of course, but to tell you the truth, I haven't used them in years. They're not accurate enough. Miles stared at An and came to a horrid realization. An wasn't lying, joking, or making this up. It was the 15 years experience gone subliminal that was carrying out these subtle functions. A backlog of experience Miles could not duplicate, nor would I wish to, he admitted to himself. Later in the day, while explaining with perfect truth that he was orienting himself to those systems, Miles covertly checked out all of An's startling assertions in the base archives. An hadn't been kidding about the Wawa. Worse, he hadn't been kidding about the computerized projections. The automated system produced local predictions of 86% accuracy, dropping to 73% at a weeks-long range forecast. An and his magical nose ran an accuracy of 96%, dropping to 94% at a week's range. When An leaves, this island is going to experience an 11 to 21% drop in forecast accuracy. They're going to notice. Oh, the anxiety, you guys. Like, it would be one thing if Miles hadn't made the shit impression that he did. I would think that perhaps then he could explain the situation with the, this man having this experience to back him up. And maybe they would be more receptive and understand that there would be a drop in accuracy, and they would come to expect it at first and bear with him. But because of the way things go in these chapters, it's clear he's not going to be given any sort of leeway or benefit of the doubt. And I am very unexcited about it. So, on the 5th day, On relapses and gets drunk again. Miles had started to be like, oh, maybe he's not so bad, but then it just happens again. So he is like, all right, I'm going to have to just keep going on my own. And he heads over to the motor pool to there's like little areas where you set up a tent and you sort of do some, I'm trying to think of the word I want. It's not like patrolling, but I'm trying to find the spot where he describes this. Base personnel, Miles had been given to understand, had grown extremely tired of picking lost anti-grav sleds out of the frigid sea, not to mention their late drivers. Miles rousted out the corporal, what's his name, Olney, who'd signed on and himself out the previous day. And Miles runs into one of the dudes who was talking shit about him when he first showed up, which got me very much on edge right away. And Miles is being like, he's moving things and repacking stuff and checking the supplies. And because he's sort of fumbling, this is brand new to him, it's like causing this guy to look with contempt. And as somebody who can really start to lose my cool if I am being observed doing something, even if I have done it 1,000,000 times, I hate this so much, So finally, this other dude comes over. Oh, Ensign, sir. Again, the emphasis fell just short of irony. You're going up to Station 9? You may want to be sure and park your scat cat out of the wind in that hollow just below the station. That way, your cat will be sure of restarting. And Miles is like, well, how could it not restart? And Olney's eyes lit, then went suddenly very neutral. Yes, but in case of a sudden wah-wah, you wouldn't want it to blow away. I thought these scat cats were heavy enough not to. Well, not away, but they'd known to blow over. I mean, it's very clear to me that they are setting him up in this moment. I felt bad because his eyes light up because he realizes what the other guy is doing, that he's trying to set Miles up, which is why their story keeps changing. First, it's, oh, you need it to restart. Then it's, it'll blow away. Then it's, well, it won't blow away, but it'll blow over. They've changed it too many times. They're just trying to get him to do a thing. And understandably, Miles is just going to do what they say because he has to do something, and taking their advice is like, what if they aren't fucking with him? And then later on, something happens and they get to say, we tried to warn him and he just ignored us. I get it. Even if you kind of feel like they're setting you up, you're gonna probably go ahead with it despite that. So the problem turns out to be that he attaches his actual tent to the vehicle. And he thinks this is an extra safety precaution to keep it from blowing over or away. He's adding more weight to it. This will be great. But unfortunately, what happens is this space that they tell him to park in has this slow moving, sucking mud. And he goes in there, falls asleep. And when he wakes up, he is underground and almost suffocated. He is starting to have this weird reaction, and thankfully, due to the training at the academy, he recognizes the symptoms of oxygen depletion, so he starts to put together what has happened pretty quickly. But this was so terrifying to me, because it's one thing to be underground and trapped. That's already terrible. But to be underground and trapped and also unconscious, so you wake up already losing air, you were breathing normally and, quote, wasting the air that you had because you were, like, unconscious when this whole thing started. Oh my God, this fucking sucks. Literally and figuratively. He manages to get out of this, but it is a struggle. And once he gets out, he has to, like, take his pants off because he is getting pulled down again. Let's see, I'm trying to find it. The cold confounded him. He could feel the muck closing around his legs, numbing like a witch's embrace. That was a weird line. Mostly, this writer nails it for me. But that was one where I was like, what? His toes pressed at full extension on the shelter's roof. It sank, and he rose a centimeter. The last of the leverage he could get by pushing. Now he must pull. And he's trying to yank himself forward, but the ground keeps giving, and he wriggles. His legs slid out of his boots and pants. His hips sucked free, and he rolled away. He lay spread-eagled for maximum support on the treacherous surface, face up to the gray swirling sky. His uniform jacket and long underwear were soaked with slime, and he'd lost one thermal sock as well as both boots and his trousers. It was sleeting. And by the time that he is found, he almost has frostbite. I think that, they have so much experience coping with that here, and a little bit more advanced technology, like when it comes to medicine, that they are able to completely help him out, and it doesn't seem like he's going to have any really lasting effects. But nevertheless, this is so truly horrifying. And he puts it together later that these guys didn't intend to risk his life. They didn't know he was going to attach his tent to it. So they just intended for him to get embarrassed by having the Scat Cat sink. They just never could have foreseen that he would do what he did based on their warning and wind up in this life-threatening situation. Also, there's the thought of was this an assassination attempt? And he very quickly dismisses that and is just like, no, I don't think they know who I am. There's no vibe of that, So there's the possibility of you could call somebody in and have these fucking clowns dealt with. But it doesn't look good, It's not really an official assassination attempt that it would be the logical step to call in some higher ranking officials. It makes him kind of look like a tattletale, somebody who can't handle the situation. And it's, unless you can prove they knew who you were and that was their intent, there's just not a way to do that without making himself look bad and losing the sweet gig that he's got potentially on the Surg, I guess. So let's see. Do you treat a lot of frostbite? Oh, once the grubs arrive, this place will be crammed. It gets really lively come winter. I'm afraid I have to mark you as recovered now, sir. Afraid? You are ordered to report to the base commander's office as soon as I release you, sir. Tell me, has anyone else ever sunk a Scat Cat? Oh, sure. The grubs lose about 5 or 6 a season. Plus minor bog downs. The engineers get real pissed about it. The commandant promised them next time he'd... Gordon lost his voice. Wonderful, thought Miles. Just great. He could see it coming. It wasn't as if he couldn't see it coming. So... he has to go change and show up, and he's in kind of an outfit that is too formal for the meeting that he is about to have. So he puts on these boots that are riding boots, part of the uniform. Nevertheless, this fucking dick can't help but mock him for it. So I loved this description as well. The general was aggressively dressed in black fatigues. At Metsov's attitude in the hierarchy, this stylistic choice usually indicated a deliberate identification with the fighting man. The only concession to his rank was their pressed neatness. His decorations were stripped down to a mere modest 3, all high combat commendations. Pseudo-modest. Pruned of the surrounding foliage, they leapt to the eye. Mentally, Miles applauded, even envied the effect. Metsov looked his part, the combat commander, absolutely unconsciously natural. So, Miles is irritated because he put on his formal wear, so to speak. He had the option to wear something much more casual, and he thought that might come across as disrespectful. But now that he sees what this guy is wearing, he realizes this was not the choice to make, which is part of why the guy makes fun of his boots. So what Miles does in this scene is tries his best to simply not rise to the bait, because this guy is poking and prodding at him terribly. And he yells at him for losing the Scat Cat. And he says, did they teach map reading? It was marked as a permafrost inversion zone. And Miles says the blue areas were labeled PIZ. Those initials were not defined, not in the key or anywhere. Then I take it you also failed to read your manual. Which one, sir? Laskowski base regulations. Miles tried frantically to remember if he'd ever seen such a disc. I think Lieutenant On may have given me a copy night before last. And you haven't read it yet? No, sir. Why not? I was set up, Miles thought wailed. No excuse, sir. Well, Ensign, in Chapter 3 of Laskowski Base Regulations, you will find a complete description of all the permafrost zones, together with the rules for avoiding them. You might look into it when you can spare a little leisure from drinking tea. Yes, sir. Miles' face was set like glass. The general had a right to skin him with a vibraknife if he chose, in private. The authority lent Miles by his uniform barely balanced the deformities that made him a target of Barriar's historically grounded intense genetic prejudice. A public humiliation that sapped that authority before men he must also command came very close to an act of sabotage, deliberate or unconscious. The general was only warming up. The service may still provide warehousing for excess warlordlings and Imperial headquarters, but out here in the real world, where there's fighting to be done, we have no use for drones. I fought my way up through the ranks. I saw casualties in Vordarians, Pretender, yada yada. It's giving Boomer very much like, you kids today don't know what we had to go through. None of you have been tested in the fires, and you don't know, and, you know, the fucking whole thing. Extremely tiresome. And I love when he says something about how, like, well, we haven't had a war, so nobody knows anything anymore. And he's like, so what? You want them to just manufacture war to keep you happy? Which I think is, like, kind of exactly what he wants, to be real. If you actually directly asked him, he would insist that's not it. But in reality, it seems like that is indeed what he wants. A man disarmed in a technological war might as well be a woman, useless, and you disarmed yourself. Throw in a little misogyny, why not? The usual punishment for a man bogging a scat cat is to dig it out himself by hand. I understand that won't be feasible, since the depth to which you sank yours is a new camp record. Nevertheless, you will report at 1400 hours to Lieutenant Bond of Engineering to assist him as he sees fit. For the damage you did to the weather station. Metsov sat up more decisively. His eyes, Miles could almost swear, lighted with a faint red glow, the corner of that seamed mouth twitching upward. You will supervise basic labor detail for 1 week, 4 hours a day. That's in addition to your other duties. So Miles can't help himself. The damage I did to the weather station was not a stupid accident like the Scat Cat, sir. It was necessary to my survival. Make that 6 hours a day, Ensign Vorkosigan. Would you have preferred the interview you'd be having right now if I'd permitted myself to freeze, sir? Silence fell, very dead, swelling like a road-killed animal in the summer sun. You are dismissed, Ensign. General Metsov hissed at last. His eyes were glittering slits. So, Miles is being tested quite appropriately. He is not only being managed by somebody in a place with a lot of incompetence, but somebody who is a hard ass and is predisposed to not like him, I think for a variety of reasons. His disability, the fact that he is like kind of nobility, and probably like the obviously there's the impression that Miles made personally the first time that they met. And later on, Miles is like kind of thinking through what's going on with this guy and believes that he is particularly cranky over the fact that he has been put in this piece of shit location, and that there must be a specific reason that he was like jettisoned to the ends of the earth when he seems to be somebody who has it together, who is competent, and that is likely just infecting his overall attitude. So let's see, here it is. Was it some subtle political odor emanating from Metsov that raised the hairs on the back of Miles' neck? Surely not. A man of real political subtlety would seek to use Miles, not abuse him. Or are you just pissed he struck you on some humiliating garbage detail? A man didn't have to be politically extreme to take a certain sadistic joy in sticking it to a representative of the Vor class. So he goes and meets Lieutenant Bond. And it takes a while for them to dig this scat cat out. The like layer of earth that has crusted on top has frozen. So it is going to be a lot of work to get it out of here. And also Miles is like, maybe I can find my boots, do you think? He has a real, like, his whole uniform, all of them have been specifically tailored to his body. And also tailored aesthetically to hide a lot of the specific differences in his appearance and minimize them. So he can't just like borrow somebody else's clothing. And this results in him being just without until he can potentially get replacements. And also this stuff is like much more expensive than average. Eventually they are yanking this up, and the chain attached to the tent makes it apparent that like these things were connected. And Bond is like, you weren't in that shelter, were you? And he's like, I was indeed. But you got out before it sank. No, I did not. How far down were you? How'd you get out of the suction? With difficulty. And adrenaline, I think. I slipped out of my boots and pants. So he tries to find them. He finds one boot. I love that he thinks about saving it in case he has to get an, what do you call it? Amputation? But then it's like, it probably wouldn't even be the right leg. They'd amputate the opposite one. And I thought that was actually really funny. You could have been killed, he said in a tone of realization. 3 times over, smothered in the bubble shelter, trapped in the bog, or frozen, waiting for rescue. Really? So he walks away. Miles comes with him. And he's like, I heard somebody kind of bragging about setting you up. And if you could have been killed, that was a real bad move on their part. They probably shouldn't have said that. And Miles says, if I'd been killed, it wouldn't have mattered if he'd bragged or not. What a service investigation missed, I flat guarantee the Imperial security investigation would have found. You knew you'd been set up. Yes. I'm surprised you didn't call Imperial security in then. Oh? Think about it, sir. Bond's gaze returned to Miles, as if taking inventory of his distasteful deformities. You don't add up for me, Vorkosigan. Why did they let you in the service? Why do you think? Vor privilege. Got it in one. Then why are you here? Vor privilege gets sent to HQ. I want ship duty. And you couldn't arrange it? I was told to earn it. That's why I'm here, to prove I can handle the service, or not. Calling in a wolf pack from ImpSec within a week of my arrival to turn the base and everyone on it inside out looking for assassination conspiracies where I judge none exist would not advance me toward my goal, no matter how entertaining it might be. And Bond says the motor pool is in engineering's chain of command. If Imperial security fell on it, it'd also fall on me. You're welcome to fall on anyone you please, sir. But if you have unofficial ways of receiving information, it follows you must have unofficial ways of sending it too. And after all, you've only my word for what happened. A warlord's word means nothing in these degenerate days. Miles bared his teeth in a smile of sorts. Ask anyone. So it feels like he's got a bit of an ally here. Somebody with limited power. I am curious, like, if this is going to have any effect. So I'll be watching eagerly to see. So, the next day, it's time for him to go in for, this was like, all day dealing with getting the Scat Cat out of here. The next day, it's cleaning it all up and getting the mud out of it and all of this. And, he gets assigned by Bog, Olney and Pattis, the guys who set him up. He kept his demeanor absolutely even. He then kept everyone, starting with himself, moving briskly. The conversation seemed to automatically limit itself to brief, wary technicalities. By the time Miles had to knock off and go report to Lieutenant Ahn, the Scat Cat and most of the gear had been restored to better condition than Miles had received it. He wished his two helpers, now driven to near twitchiness by uncertainty, an earnest good day. If they hadn't figured it out by now, they were hopeless. Miles wondered bitterly why he seemed to have so much better luck establishing rapport with bright men like Bond. Cecil had been right. If Miles couldn't figure out how to command the dull as well, he'd never make it as a service officer. Not at Camp Permafrost, anyway. It's such a, I know that it's very problematic in its way to be like, dealing with people who are not as smart as me is really difficult. But honestly, I think a lot of us understand the truth in that, and it can be genuinely startling sometimes. And it can be difficult to know that that's why you don't get along with somebody initially until you really stop and look at it. I understand the weird kind of obstacle that this is posing for him. So, the third day of doing this work, the sergeant presented Miles with a Scat Cat full of equipment, a disc of the related equipment manuals, and the schedule for drain and culvert maintenance. It was to be another learning experience. Miles wondered if General Metsov had selected this task personally. He rather thought so. And this is so funny. It reminded me of Tyrion being assigned the drains in Casterly Rock, and how they had the most perfectly functioning sewer system of any castle ever, because he was just I'm going to take this fucking seriously. And this just really reminded me of that, just being assigned this thing. And it's funny because this is all meant to be a punishment. But I think all of this knowledge is going to come in real handy at some point. I think there is a reason that he is being set up on these specific things. I don't mean reason in terms of the commander, I mean the author. So, flushing pipes with high pressure could produce some surprising effects. There were chemical compounds that had some quite military properties, such as the ability to dissolve anything instantly, including human flesh. In the following 3 days, Miles learned more about the infrastructure of Laskowski Base than he'd ever imagined wanting to know. He'd even calculated the point where one well-placed charge could bring the entire system down if he ever decided he wanted to destroy the place. On the 6th day, Miles and his team were sent to clear a blocked culvert out by the Grubs' practice fields. It was easy to spot. A silver sheet of water lapped the raised roadway on one side. On the other, only a feeble trickle emerged to creep away down the bottom of a deep ditch. So, they get down there. They're trying to find this clog. And he goes and stares down and is like, there is something... That culvert is, quite large. Give me a light. Could there be anything further from ship duty than this? The closest he'd come to anything of the sort was spelunking in the Dendari Mountains. He gripped the light tighter, dropped to hands and knees, and shinnied into the drain. Miles meditated briefly on Olney and Pates. They had developed a cool, reasonably efficient working relationship over the last few days, based, Miles had no illusions, on a fear of God instilled in the two men by Miles' good angel Lieutenant Bond. How did Bond accomplish that quiet authority? He had to figure that one out. Bond was good at his job, for starters, but what else? Miles scraped around the curve, shone his light on the clot, and recoiled, swearing. "What's in there, Ensign?" "A pair of boots. That's all. Their owner is still wearing them." And that is the end of the chapter. Very curious about this. It doesn't seem like this place is somewhere that a person could just die and be missing and nobody would notice. So either this is somebody that they had been looking for, that they gave up as having maybe drowned or gotten sunk and they decided we're never going to find the body, or this is somebody who very, very recently died and hasn't been missed yet. And what are they doing in a sewer? After Miles is just like, oh, I know exactly in this whole sewer system where I'd place a bomb to fuck this entire place up. Somebody crawling into a sewer and getting stuck. Why was he down there? This isn't somebody who was on duty with them. This is day 6 that he's going down here. So they would have known this guy was on the same, detail with them. This is weird. This is very weird. So I'm really, really interested in where this goes. All right. I've got to wrap up, once again, over time, as I do. But thank you all again so much for listening and for commissioning this whole series. I've been having so much fun covering this. Thank you, Jeff, for your flexibility and rescheduling. Hope y'all are enjoying the coverage. And until next time, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.